another really significant thread is that I see young children and the period of early childhood as a key time in the lifespan for spirituality. Some of my work with gifted children has really challenged my notion that life begins at birth. Some of my work with young gifted children has really challenged my notion of the child, not just as strong, capable and curious, but even questioning, is the moment of birth in this lifetime the beginning of life? And that's quite a confronting thought, and people in our culture don't really embrace notions of multiple lifetimes. But I have really wondered, what would it mean if we conceptualised the young child as having another lifetime? And how would we engage with the child if that's how we saw the early childhood period? I also have been really enriched by delving into spiritual practice, and I take very seriously notions of mindfulness, presence, notions that I've gathered from Buddhism that I can see actually reflected often in the experience of Reggio Emilia, and I look at the interconnections there are between pedagogical practice and spiritual traditions. I think there's a wonderful opportunity for us to engage with some of that. So the notion of cross-disciplinary work has always also ignited my excitement for the work that I do. I have really been enriched by conversations with architects, designers, and my work on ABC Play School has been enriched by producers and directors. Work with museum designers has expanded my vision of what's possible in different contexts. So I guess I also bring that multidisciplinary perspective to my work in early childhood. In early childhood we talk about holistic perspectives, and I guess I would embrace that notion, but I want to explore and interrogate that further. For me, holistic perspectives means that we consider the child mind, body and heart. So thinking with head, with heart and with body. That in the early years particularly, children engage with the world through their bodies, and there's body sense, and sensory perception is a way of knowing that we need to validate, respect and allow time for. And the opportunity of working with young children is that they can teach us to re-engage with that. So to not have to intellectualise everything, but just to be there engaging with that sensory experience. And I see this very much connected to thinking with the heart and the spiritual dimension. So for me, I've gained a lot from looking at other traditions around spirituality, particularly Buddhism, although I have come from a Christian tradition and I have gained a lot from Christian mystics. Then some of the key concepts of Buddhism I think can be very significant in terms of early childhood. I also want to validate that for me there are many ways of knowing. And significant in my work has been knowing that hasn't come through very careful intellectual deliberation, but a knowing that has come as part of a dream or as an early morning thought or as a voice in my head that seems to come from someplace else. It's also been very prominent in the creative process for me, and I think about concepts of flow and tapping into another level of consciousness that maybe is some universal collective consciousness. And so I want to frame education that validates these multiple ways of knowing and creates room for children to explore and play with other ways of knowing, to not think that those are less valued or have no place in an educational context or in educational conversations. And the notions of wondering and asking questions and responding to children's questions with more questions can help us to create a space for children to explore other ways of knowing.
I was relieved when I heard that the nature-nurture debate was put aside, that it wasn't an either-or anymore, and because that's what rang true to me, I always felt that way. But I was also at the same time disappointed that the discussion around brain research seemed to be privileged about the knowledge of how we grow in the nature sense. And then at the same time, I saw that this is the nature of the scientific paradigm, that it has a lot of power. So in my view, I wanted to hear conversations about the interplay not only of our physical body, but of our soul life, and possibly of our spirit life as well. That as an individual, from the moment the human is born, that it's the individuality, the relationship and interplay between the ecosystem around this individuality that shape and is shaped by the individuality. So it seems a little confusing, but this idea that we are becoming from the moment we are born to be who we are, and that we act upon what we find out of that individuality, and the world acts upon us, makes sense to me. Mine is if you like, a meta view. I have a picture that a child is born into an intergenerational line of experience that's come before them, and they are meeting the future and what's emerging. And at the point at which those two meet, the soul life, our feelings, our emotions, are metering what we have known and know from the past and what we're meeting. And I also see that we are imbued, our I, if you like, is imbued with spirit, that this sense of spirit, of life force that's connected in mysterious ways to one another and to all that walk the earth, and of course the land that we walk on, are there to support us in our becoming who we are. So it's against this backdrop that I see children. When I meet the child, it's with this view in mind, and at the same time I see my own becoming as in relationship with that. So I find the mystery fun. Who am I and who are you? And what does this encounter mean? And what can I learn that will support me in my becoming? And of course, the question would be, as an early childhood practitioner, what can I do to support the child to become who they truly are? I like the view that the child chooses to come into a family, to come into a cultural setting in order to become themselves. And I also like the view that the parents choose the child, and that the child comes in order to fulfill its destiny. So it's, for me, makes sense then when I'm again working with children and meeting parents to see the relationships and the relatedness between the child and the family and their ecosystem, and the part that I have in all of that.
The worldview I'm going to talk about is the spiritual, and I have my own ideas about what spirituality means, as does everyone else. It's a concept that everyone has a very personal view about, so I never seek to try and do anything except define it for myself, and I often modify my definition, which started as an idea that everything connects to everything else, which is fairly common, but the overarching idea that I really explore is the notion of everyday spirituality, that spirituality flows through our everyday life and can flow through everything we do. So this is quite powerful. I also think that it connects me beyond the human. so too everything in nature. And I started off with a definition that referred to spirituality as a connection to all living things, but I now think it connects to the animate and inanimate. So this is extending all the time, extending and changing. And I think this is the strength of having a worldview which acknowledges the spiritual, that it never stays still. Perhaps I would refer here to the theory of Gilles Deleuze, or Deleuze and Guattari, that spirituality is very much a line of flight. So it's something I take off with, it's something that I float around with, it's something I play with, and spirituality can be seen as a bunch of warm fuzzies, but it's also very contentious. So the line of flight as well, it can soar, it can crash, and in my work, in my life, it can do both things. It can be anywhere. So spirituality comes from the Latin word spirare, to breathe, and of course I don't have to think about breathing, it's something I do. But I could think about this as it applies to spirituality. Is it something I can just take for granted in my life? And I would say that in terms of the EYLF, well, no. It kind of behoves us as people who are involved in early childhood education now to actually think about the spiritual and reflect about it and not take it for granted. So in the EYLF, the spiritual is defined as a range of human experiences including a sense of awe and wonder and an exploration of being and knowing. I think it would be useful if people who work with young children, like I do, just use this as a stepping stone, as a moving off place. And how I started when I began to research spirituality in early childhood settings was to really get people to tell their story, like possibly I was doing just then about my influences. Everyone has a spiritual story, even if it's to tell you about why they haven't got a spiritual story. So pedagogically, if spirituality is a basis for practice, I have to think this for me means a place of complete respect for the other. And if I have respect for the other, it means that everything I do is with awareness. It's a response to what Levinas calls the face of the other. And in fact, if I think about the face of the other, I have already responded. So the demand of the face of the other demands me. It demands a certain response from me. What is that going to be? The demand for the ethical encounter. If I go back to Derrida, who's always influenced me, he talks about hospitality. So pedagogically, what does hospitality look like if I'm welcoming families, if I'm greeting young children? How do I do this? The challenge, I think, pedagogically is to reflect on that sense of joy. It doesn't mean being frantically busy. It means sometimes being with stillness, allowing silences, sometimes just being together.